London, 1888. Thick fog rolled through the narrow streets of Whitechapel like smoke crawling from the mouth of hell itself. Gas lamps flickered weakly in the darkness, while horse carriages rattled across wet cobblestones stained with mud, sewage, and blood. Women wandered freezing alleyways, searching desperately for customers just to survive another night. Violent gangs ruled entire neighborhoods after sunset. Fear already lived inside Whitechapel long before the murders began. But during the autumn of 1888, a new terror emerged from the darkness. A killer unlike anything Victorian England had ever seen before. Nobody knew his face. Nobody heard his voice clearly. Witnesses described only shadows disappearing into the hall. Fog moments after women were discovered, butchered beyond recognition, their throats sliced open, their bodies mutilated with horrifying precision. Then the letters arrived. Written in mocking ink, the killer taunted police and newspapers openly. One message ended with two chilling words the world would never forget: Jack the Ripper. More than a century later, the identity of history's most infamous serial killer remains completely unknown. To understand the terror of Jack the Ripper, you first have to understand Whitechapel itself. During the late 19th century, East London was one of the poorest and most dangerous places in England. Thousands of people lived crammed inside overcrowded buildings filled with disease, violence, alcoholism, and starvation. For women, survival inside Whitechapel was especially brutal. Many turned to prostitution simply to avoid starvation. Violence against women was tragically common and rarely investigated seriously. Most victims lived invisible lives ignored by society completely. That reality allowed Jack the Ripper to move through Whitechapel without immediately attracting intense attention. On August 31st, 1888, the body of Mary Ann Nichols was discovered in Bucks Row shortly before dawn. Her throat had been sliced deeply, nearly severing her head. Her abdomen had been mutilated with savage precision. Police immediately realized the attack was unusually violent, even for Whitechapel. Only 8 days later, another body appeared. Annie Chapman was discovered in the backyard of Hanbury Street on September 8th. Her throat had been cut so deeply she was nearly decapitated. Parts of her abdomen had been removed with terrifying surgical precision. As newspapers covered the murders daily, panic exploded across London. Women feared leaving homes after dark. Vigilante groups formed, searching streets at night, armed with clubs and knives. Police increased patrols, yet the killer continued disappearing into the endless maze of alleys and shadows after every attack. Then the letters arrived. On September 27th, news agencies received a handwritten message addressed directly to police. The writer mocked investigators openly, claiming responsibility for the murders and promising more violence soon. The letter ended with a horrifying signature: "Yours truly, Jack the Ripper." Days later, another letter appeared, mentioning details connected to the murders before those details became public knowledge. The writer called himself Saucy Jackie and described the killings with disturbing excitement. Jack the Ripper stopped being merely a murderer hiding in Whitechapel. He became something larger, a nightmare figure stalking Victorian London from the shadows while openly taunting authorities who seemed powerless to stop him. Then came the night history would remember as the double event. On September 30th, 1888, Jack the Ripper killed twice within less than 1 hour. The first victim was Elizabeth Stride, discovered with her throat cut. Investigators believed the killer may have been interrupted before completing his usual ritual. Less than an hour later, police discovered another body only a short distance away. Catherine Edos had suffered unimaginable mutilations inside Mitre Square. Her face was slashed violently. One kidney and part of her uterus were missing completely. The murders sent London into absolute hysteria. Crowds gathered around murder scenes, screaming accusations at police officers who appeared completely helpless. Then the murders suddenly stopped for several weeks. Some hoped the killer had died or fled London. But on November 9th, 1888, Whitechapel awoke to the most horrifying murder of all. Mary Jane Kelly was young compared to the earlier victims. Unlike the others, Kelly lived indoors, inside a tiny, rented room on Miller's Court. Sometime during the night, Jack the Ripper entered her room and unleashed unimaginable brutality. The crime scene horrified investigators beyond anything they had witnessed before. Her face was destroyed completely. Internal organs were removed and placed around the bed. Blood-covered walls, furniture, and floors throughout the tiny room. Experienced police officers reportedly became physically ill while examining the scene. After Mary Jane Kelly's murder, the killings linked directly to Jack the Ripper appeared to stop completely. That sudden silence created one of the greatest mysteries in criminal history. Why did the murders end? The investigation into Jack the Ripper quickly became one of the largest manhunts Victorian England had ever seen. Hundreds of officers flooded Whitechapel daily. Thousands of people were questioned. Yet despite enormous public pressure, authorities failed repeatedly. Modern forensic science did not exist. Fingerprinting was not yet used widely. DNA evidence was unimaginable. Investigators relied heavily on eyewitness testimony, but Whitechapel's foggy streets and chaos produced wildly inconsistent descriptions. Witnesses contradicted one another constantly. Over time, countless suspects emerged. One of the most controversial theories involved Prince Albert Victor, grandson of Queen Victoria himself. Rumors claimed the prince secretly committed the murders, or was connected to a royal conspiracy. Historians generally reject this theory, but it remains fascinating. Another major suspect was Montague Druitt, a barrister whose body was discovered in the River Thames shortly after the final murder. His apparent suicide shortly after the killings stopped made the theory deeply compelling. Perhaps the most widely discussed suspect today is Aaron Kosminski, a Polish immigrant living in Whitechapel during the murders. Kosminski reportedly suffered from serious mental illness and displayed deep hatred toward women. Modern DNA analysis performed on evidence decades later reignited public fascination with Kosminski, though experts continue debating the reliability of those results fiercely. Jack the Ripper was never captured, never identified with certainty, never brought to justice. One reason may simply be timing. Victorian policing lacked modern investigative technology. A killer operating carefully inside overcrowded slums could disappear easily into darkness before authorities arrived. Some historians believe the killer possessed medical knowledge because of the precise mutilations. Others believe Jack the Ripper was likely an ordinary local man, familiar with Whitechapel streets. Someone who blended into poverty so completely that nobody ever noticed him. Perhaps the most terrifying possibility is also the simplest. Jack the Ripper may have looked completely ordinary. That idea continues haunting the case more than 100 years later. Because despite massive investigations, endless theories, and generations of researchers searching for answers, nobody truly knows who walked through Whitechapel's fog carrying a knife during the autumn of 1888. The truth remains hidden somewhere, inside history's shadows, and perhaps that is why the story continues haunting the world after all these years. Because somewhere inside the dark fog of Victorian London, a killer vanished into history without leaving behind a face, a name, or a final answer.